For more than a year, Confederate Brigadier General Richard Brooke Garnett had lived with a wound deeper than any bullet. Accused of cowardice by Stonewall Jackson after the Battle of Kernstown, he watched his honor slowly destroyed. Charges were filed. Whispers followed him everywhere. A proud soldier with 20 years of faithful service suddenly found himself quietly judged by the men he led. No trial ever cleared his name. No apology ever came. So on July 3, 1863, at Gettysburg, Garnett made his final stand. Wearing his old blue overcoat and riding at the very front of his brigade despite a painful leg injury, he rode straight into the fire, directly toward the stone wall on Cemetery Ridge. Determined to prove once and for all that he was no coward, he vanished in the smoke. His body was never found. The only trace ever recovered was his cavalry sword, later discovered in a Baltimore pawnshop. This is the story of a man who was talked down, broken in reputation, and pushed to the edge of despair, all in the name of honor. If you want to hear more powerful, forgotten stories from the Civil War, please subscribe to this channel and turn your notifications so you never miss the next one. The vanished General Richard Brooke Garnett was born on November 21, 1817, in Essex County, Virginia. Raised in a family that prized duty and service, he developed a quiet determination early in life. In 1841, he graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, finishing 29th in his class. The academy sharpened his tactical skills and instilled a strong code of personal honor that would guide, and later trouble, his entire career. Garnett went on to serve nearly 20 years in the United States Army. He performed staff duties during the Mexican-American War and later endured the harsh conditions of frontier postings. He also saw action in the Seminole conflicts in Florida. These experiences turned him into a steady, battle-tested officer respected for his calm judgment and attention to detail rather than bold displays. By early 1861, Garnett had become a seasoned professional soldier who understood both the demands of command and the heavy cost of war. Few men in uniform possessed his combination of practical experience and measured temperament. He approached every assignment with the same sense of responsibility that had defined his life since West Point, yet the gathering storm of civil war would soon test that sense of duty in ways he could never have anticipated. The country he had faithfully served for 2 decades was splitting apart, forcing him to choose between his native Virginia and the federal government he had sworn to defend. That choice would set him on a collision course with history and place him at the center of one of Gettysburg's most enduring mysteries. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Garnett confronted one of the most difficult choices of his life. As a Virginian with deep roots in the South, he felt compelled to side with his home state. In May 1861, he formally resigned his commission in the United States Army and offered his services to the Confederacy. Confederate leaders quickly recognized his long experience and promoted him to brigadier general. They assigned him command of the renowned Stonewall Brigade, the elite unit once led by Thomas J. Jackson. This was a position of great trust and visibility. Garnett accepted the responsibility with characteristic seriousness, focusing on training and discipline during the uncertain early months of the conflict. He led his new command with the same steady professionalism he had shown throughout his earlier career. Soldiers responded well to his clear orders and concern for their welfare. For a short period, it appeared that his years of faithful service might finally bring him greater recognition and success in this new army. However, the intense pressures of wartime leadership would soon expose deep differences in command philosophy. Garnett's practical, cautious approach would clash sharply with superiors who demanded unyielding aggression at all costs. The same qualities that made him an effective officer, careful judgment and unwillingness to waste lives, were about to place him on a dangerous collision course within his own army. On March 23, 1862, in the Shenandoah Valley near Kernstown, Garnett's brigade found itself in a desperate struggle. Jackson had ordered an attack based on faulty intelligence against a much larger Union force. As the afternoon wore on, Garnett's men exhausted their ammunition while facing threats from 3 sides. The position had become impossible to hold. After weighing the dire situation, Garnett issued the order to withdraw and save his command from destruction. It was a prudent tactical move made under extreme pressure, designed to prevent needless slaughter. His soldiers executed the retreat in good order, preserving lives that would have been lost in a hopeless stand. Jackson, however, saw the action as blatant disobedience. He expected absolute adherence to orders and viewed any independent judgment as weakness. The withdrawal without his explicit permission enraged him. Within days, he moved against Garnett with swift severity. This single decision at Kernstown, born of battlefield necessity, marked the beginning of Garnett's long ordeal. What should have been recognized as responsible leadership instead became the source of lasting controversy. The clash revealed a fundamental divide between two officers, one guided by practical reality, the other by unyielding principle. Stonewall Jackson reacted with immediate and intense anger. He regarded Garnett's withdrawal as a serious breach of military discipline. On April 1, 1862, he ordered Garnett placed under arrest and filed formal charges against him for neglect of duty and conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline. In the language of that era, these accusations carried a clear implication of cowardice. A court-martial began, but the demands of active campaigning repeatedly interrupted the proceedings. Jackson remained firm in his stance and refused to withdraw the charges. Garnett protested his innocence, insisting that continuing the fight with no ammunition would have destroyed his brigade for no strategic purpose. Several officers who had been present at Kernstown privately agreed with his assessment, yet they stayed silent out of deference to Jackson. The case dragged on without resolution. When Jackson suffered his fatal wound at Chancellorsville in May 1863, the court-martial effectively ended with him. No verdict was ever delivered. The charges were never officially dropped or cleared. Garnett returned to duty carrying the heavy burden of unresolved suspicion that followed him wherever he went in the Army. The unresolved charges created a constant shadow over Garnett's daily existence. In an army where reputation meant everything, the lingering accusations of cowardice affected how other officers treated him and how soldiers whispered about their commander. Promotions that should have come his way passed him by. Conversations grew awkward. He felt the quiet judgment in every glance and every meeting. Determined to restore his good name, Garnett began volunteering for the most hazardous assignments. He sought out situations where courage could be proven beyond any doubt. General James Longstreet later observed that Garnett appeared to be actively looking for opportunities that might end his life or finally silence the doubts surrounding him. This was not recklessness, but a deliberate effort to erase the stain left by Kernstown. He carried himself with dignity and continued performing his duties with the same professionalism he had always shown. Yet inside, the weight of suspicion never lifted. Every battle became more than just combat. It turned into a personal test. Garnett understood that in the eyes of his fellow Confederates, only outstanding bravery on the field could clear his record. This internal struggle defined the final year of his life. The man who had once enjoyed quiet respect now marched under a cloud, constantly aware that many still questioned his nerve. He channeled that pressure into action, pushing himself harder as the war moved toward its fateful turning point in Pennsylvania. In the summer of 1863, Robert E. Lee launched his second invasion of the North. Garnett received command of a brigade in George Pickett's division. The Confederates marched through Maryland and into Pennsylvania, hoping for a decisive victory on Northern soil. For Garnett, this campaign represented another chance to serve with distinction and perhaps finally move past the doubts that still clung to his name. During the march north, misfortune struck. Garnett suffered a painful leg injury, most likely from a kick by his own horse. The wound was severe enough to make walking difficult, yet he refused to stay behind or turn over command. Determined to remain with his men, he chose to lead the brigade from the saddle despite the constant discomfort. As the army approached Gettysburg, tension filled the ranks. Garnett prepared his soldiers for what lay ahead. He maintained his usual calm demeanor, issuing clear instructions and showing the same steady leadership that had defined his career. Few around him knew the full extent of his physical pain or the deeper emotional burden he continued to carry from the previous year. The leg injury forced him to ride at the head of his troops rather than march on foot with them. This decision made him more visible during the coming battle, but it also reflected his unbreakable commitment to duty. As the Confederate forces concentrated around the small Pennsylvania town in early July, Garnett stood ready to play his part in what would become the war's most famous assault. On the morning of July 3, 1863, Garnett made a striking personal choice. Despite commanding Confederate troops, he put on an old dark blue overcoat, likely one from his pre-war days in the United States Army. In the middle of a gray uniformed force preparing for battle, the blue garment stood out noticeably. Some soldiers took quiet notice of their general wearing what resembled enemy colors. Whether the choice came from necessity due to the morning chill, sentiment for his long service, or simple habit, it made Garnett even more conspicuous. With his leg still hurting from the recent injury, he mounted his horse and took his place at the front of the brigade. The overcoat flapped around him as he rode among his men, offering encouragement and final instructions. The atmosphere around Gettysburg grew heavier as the day advanced. Garnett's brigade formed part of Pickett's division, positioned on the right of the assault line. He remained calm and focused, showing no outward sign of the physical pain or inner doubts he carried. His visible presence in the distinctive coat helped steady the troops as they waited for the order to advance. By early afternoon, the stage was set. Nearly 12,000 Confederate soldiers prepared to cross the open fields toward Cemetery Ridge. Garnett, seated upright on his horse and clearly outlined in blue, positioned himself where every man could see him. This would be the moment he had been marching toward since Kernstown, an opportunity to demonstrate courage in the clearest way possible. At 3 o'clock on the afternoon of July 3, 1863, the order came. Nearly 12,000 Confederate soldiers stepped out from the tree line on Seminary Ridge and began the long march across open ground toward Cemetery Ridge. Garnett rode at the head of his brigade on the right side of Pickett's line. His old blue overcoat made him stand out clearly among the gray ranks. The advance started in good order, with battle flags flying and officers keeping the lines straight. Then the Union artillery opened fire. Shells exploded across the field, tearing holes in the formations. Men fell by the dozens, but the survivors closed ranks and continued forward. Garnett stayed mounted, riding upright despite his injured leg, urging his troops onward with calm authority. The distance seemed endless. Smoke drifted across the fields. The sound of cannon and rifle fire grew deafening. Garnett's brigade maintained its alignment better than many others, moving steadily toward the stone wall on the Union center. He remained highly visible, his presence giving confidence to the soldiers around him even as casualties mounted. The heat of the afternoon sun combined with the choking smoke and dust made every step difficult. Yet Garnett pressed on, leading from the front as he had chosen to do. This was the moment he had waited for since the shadow of Kernstown first fell across his name. With every yard gained under devastating fire, he demonstrated the courage that had been questioned for more than a year. As the battered Confederate lines reached the stone wall on Cemetery Ridge, the fighting turned savage in close quarters. Garnett's brigade pushed toward a spot known as the Angle, where the wall made a sharp bend. Here the Union defense stood strongest, pouring devastating rifle fire into the advancing men at point-blank range. Garnett remained mounted and highly visible in his dark blue overcoat. Witnesses later described him riding steadily forward, encouraging his soldiers even as bullets whistled around him. His calm presence stood out amid the chaos and smoke. Several accounts noted him near the wall, still directing his brigade and refusing to fall back. Then the intensity peaked. Artillery and musket fire reached a terrible crescendo. Some survivors reported seeing Garnett's horse struck and going down. Others caught a final glimpse of him on foot or still in the saddle, moving among the shattered ranks. In the blinding smoke and hand-to-hand struggle that followed, everything became confused and desperate. No one saw the exact moment he fell. No one could later confirm how or where he died. The overwhelming carnage at the Angle swallowed him completely. In a matter of minutes, Garnett vanished from sight and from the living record of the battle. His men fought on without him, but their commander had disappeared into the storm of fire and death. The Angle became the high-water mark of the Confederacy that day. For Richard Garnett, it became something far more personal, the place where his long quest for redemption reached its mysterious end. When the smoke finally cleared from the fields of Gettysburg, Confederate officers began searching for Garnett. His staff looked everywhere. Union burial parties combed the ground in front of the stone wall. Despite careful efforts, no body matching his description, a tall Virginian officer in a dark blue overcoat, could be positively identified. He had simply vanished amid the terrible carnage at the Angle. In the days and weeks that followed, fellow generals expressed deep sorrow at his loss. Yet his remains were never found. Some believe artillery fire destroyed his body beyond recognition. Others think he lies in an unmarked mass grave. The exact circumstances of his death remain unknown to this day. Years later, a single artifact surfaced. Garnett's cavalry sword appeared in a Baltimore pawnshop. It was eventually recovered and returned to his family. Today, the sword rests at the Virginia Military Institute, the only confirmed physical object connected to him. Its discovery only deepened the mystery surrounding the man who once carried it. Modern historians have carefully re-examined the events at Kernstown. Most now agree that Garnett's decision to withdraw was militarily sound and that Jackson's charges were overly harsh. The stigma Garnett carried for more than a year was largely unjustified. In his final ride at Gettysburg, he answered those doubts in the only language his era understood, by facing death at the very front. Richard Brooke Garnett disappeared on July 3, 1863. His body was never recovered, but his story endures as a powerful example of how personal honor, military duty, and the chaos of war can intersect in the most tragic ways. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to discover more compelling stories from the Civil War, Please subscribe to this channel for regular, high-quality videos that bring these forgotten moments and figures back to life. Your support helps us continue telling these important stories.